Welcome everyone to another video. This demonstration today is going to be focusing on my painting process of this idea of simplification and working from large shapes and then breaking it down to medium shapes and then breaking those down into small shapes and then saving any kind of refining or detail for the end. I'm going to be using a reference photo by Primitive Reference. There's a whole folder of references that they offer for free on their website, so check it out if you're interested. As you can see here, working on this 9 by 12 inch canvas, I've got just a very simple drawing. So try to focus on the bigger shapes, anything that's kind of like a significant big shape, including a cast shadow or the main division of light and dark in the background. Here you can see it a little more easily. I kind of solidified or darkened some of those, refined some of the drawing with some paint, so you can easily see it here. But I just focused on big shapes, no small shapes, or at least no detail, I would say. There's a few small shapes on those little nuts there, but other than that, I'm really focusing on just the main, simple shape structure here. Focusing on shape and proportion, trying to match what I see from the reference photo. And here you can see just a simple light, medium, and dark kind of large shapes that I filled in a very flat, simple way, just to kind of show you, identifying some of those darkest values like those cast shadows, and just really keeping things very, very simple with the large shapes at this stage. Here's the paints that I'm going to be using today. It's a limited color palette, Cad Red Light. I've got a Cad Yellow Medium, Ultramarine Blue, Titanium White, and Ivory Black. So I'll put those on my palette and use a palette knife to pre-mix a few colors and range of value on my palette before I start painting. I will be painting alla prima, which means all in one sitting today. Here you can see a little bit of what I did on the palette before I started painting. All the colors straight from the tube are on the bottom side of my palette here that you can see, and then mixing my secondaries with the palette knife a little bit in advance, just a few colors that I know that I'll need. But throughout the painting process, if I need a new color or a different value or something like that, I'll use my palette knife to mix more. I'm also going to show you which brushes I'm working with today. All the brushes I'm working with today are by Trekell, and I'm mostly going to be working on that largest one you see there, the flat, the kind of medium-sized flat brush is mostly what I'll use for the majority of the painting. And then towards the end, I might move into a couple of those smaller sizes if I need to have the control to refine a little bit. You can see I applied a little color with my palette knife to kind of just test it out, because I want to see if this is the color that is a good color value match to my reference photo. And I decided it was, so now I'm just going into that large area there of negative space in my composition, and I'm just going to fill that in with one layer of that color with my flat brush there. Because I'm working alla prima, I'm using 50-50 linseed oil and solvent as my medium. And when I start, I usually start with the largest shapes or largest areas. So, of course, the table area and the background will be filled in early on. And then any other large shapes I will start to fill in. Again, we kind of want to focus on these bigger areas before we start moving into breaking things down and making things more specific. So it's all this whole idea of simplification and building the painting, as a process from simplified into complex. It's just like sculpting. So with sculpting, you start with a big hunk of clay, then you break it down to large shapes and then medium shapes, and then details come at the very end. As I'm filling in that area, I'm just trying to be aware of any kind of color, temperature, or value shifts that I need to make. But in general, I'm just kind of applying a large flat, application of color with the brush. And I can always change it later. If I realize later that it's not working, I can always adjust it. But I'm just trying to take my time, and it may appear fast in the video. I did speed it up to make for a good video, but I was taking my time and being thoughtful about the color and value matching, and really trying to fill in all that negative space before I work on the objects, because again, focusing on those bigger areas first. And even when I start on the objects, I'll keep it pretty flat and simple at first, just a general color and value matching. So like if you see little tiny changes and stuff like that, try to ignore any kind of small detail informations or small subtle changes to things. Just kind of look at the big picture. So as you can see, with working in these bigger shape areas, using that bigger size brush is helpful because it helps you work a bit faster. If you are working with a tiny brush the entire time and you're doing a large shape, it's going to take you for forever. So as I work with this process of large to medium to small with detail last, I usually, that kind of is like reflected in the choice of the brushes, right? So large brushes, and then I move into smaller brushes as I move into smaller shapes. So as you can see, the temperature in the background got cooler, and so I kind of added a bit of the blue and black into my mixture back there. Now I've got all the negative space filled in, and so I'm starting in with the cast shadows. The cast shadows in this reference image are very strong because there's like a really strong single light source. And because they are so strong and noticeable, that's why I paid attention to them in that initial drawing as an important shape in the composition. And in this reference image, it's a setup with a really warm, there's a warm light source coming in from like the right, and then in contrast, the shadows are going to be a bit cooler. So that's why you're seeing this kind of like cool gray color mixing like the blue and the black to get a cooler color, and then of course adding white if the value needs to get lighter. So just kind of filling those in. And of course, because the color is already on my brush, I'm just looking around to see if there's any other obvious areas in the composition that have that same color, because, if it's on my brush, I might as well place it where it needs to go. Don't worry if your edges are not perfect at this stage. We can always refine them later. Just focus on kind of filling in those large shapes. So here you can see I lightened the value in some areas. There's kind of a dual light source happening. So like I said earlier, coming in from the right, there is this warm, stronger light source. And then coming in from the left, there's a little like weaker secondary light source, it seems to me. That's why there's kind of like these differences in the cast shadows. I'm just doing a little bit of adjusting in the background. I find that it's easier to get that negative space filled in first, and then later when I'm doing those objects, I can kind of refine the edges And if I need to, I can always go back into that background color if I need to carve around the edge of an object to clean it up or anything like that. But when you're trying to match the colors within the objects, it's a lot easier when you're comparing it to the background colors rather than just a stark white canvas. You can see here I'm just laying in the general light area of the pumpkin. So just that kind of orange color. I'm not getting swept up in the details or the three-dimensionality or anything like that yet. I'm just simply putting in a bit of color there. And I noticed that same orange was in a more subtle way kind of showing on the lower left side of the pumpkin. So I just threw a little bit in there, but of course in general that's the shadow side, so it's going to have a darker value. And since the orange is on my brush, I went ahead and put it in that reflection on the bucket. And I threw a little bit into the acorns because they do have a touch of that orange in them as well. So now I'm trying to get a good color value match for that strong core shadow on the pumpkin. Even if you can't get a perfect color match, if you can get the value and temperature correct, then it's going to look realistic. So as you can see, I'm being very blocky, very simple with that. That's what's helpful about these flat-shaped brushes, is you can kind of accentuate the structure and that kind of more geometric look of blocking things in on these earlier stages of the painting. Later, if you want to get more specific with like curves and organic things and like specific rounded edges, it's easier to do that in the later stages. In these early stages, I keep things a lot more simplified and geometric. And again, I'm just trying to fill in all those big shapes with some color, like a general color value match. That way I'm kind of getting rid of all of that stark white of the canvas early on, so that I can do a better job of matching the colors and values, because as you know, colors and values can look a little bit different depending on what they're next to. And if you're trying to match a color or value and it's next to a stark white, it's easy to go a bit too high with the contrast and have difficulty getting a good match. Oh, I should also note, I mentioned that this is a 9 by 12 inch canvas. It's actually not a canvas. I recommend for beginners to use canvas. I think even, professionals and people who've painted for a very long time use canvas. It's probably the most popular surface to paint on. I like for these smaller paintings, I just personally like to use they're called Gessoboard. Ampersand, the brand Ampersand, makes a primed masonite board called Gessoboard, and they're just really nice and smooth and easy to work on. I personally like them. Not that I don't like canvas, but depending on what I'm doing, I'll choose what kind of surface I prefer. So just wanted to let you know in case you're wondering, like, where's the texture of the canvas? Yeah, it's kind of more of a bit more of a smooth surface in a canvas. But the result that you would get following what I'm teaching you is the same pretty much whether you're using canvas or this gesso board. All right, trying to get a general color and value match for some of these areas on the bucket. And remember, with things like, metal or any kind of shiny surface, I didn't like that color. You can see I kind of scraped it a little bit with the palette knife so I could go over it with there we go. There's a color that I like. It kind of had that cool tone. But like I was saying, with things that are reflective like metal, you're going to see colors from things that are surrounding the metal reflecting onto it. So there's going to be a variety of colors on there. That's why you see orange on there, because it's reflecting from the pumpkin. There's those dark splotches near the bottom of the bucket that are reflecting from the acorns. There's a bit of that secondary blue light source coming in from the left that's creating those kind of bluish gray reflections. Try to simplify all that into just like general shapes. So don't worry about any kind of details or like specific tiny information of reflections. See here how I kind of laid everything in really like simple and blocky. And I'll show you a couple more stages of how I developed it further. Sorry about the glare. The glossy oil paint, especially on the upper left, was kind of showing a lot of glare. But here you could see I refined it just a bit more. And then you'll see me refine it just a bit more after this. But just focused on the structure by really keeping it. Here we go. So I think this is about as far as I got with this one. I feel like everything looks three-dimensional. The color value matching is accurate, or at least pretty close. The proportions, the shapes, everything is kind of focused on that strong structure, really focusing on the larger shapes. Could this be refined further and more detailed? Sure, of course it could. I personally don't like my paintings to look like photographs. I think that photography is like its own art form. So if you want it to look that close to real life, become a photographer, right? But, it looks like a painting. I think that it looks like a realistic 3D painting of a real setup from real life, and that's what I was going for. So I hope you enjoyed this and learned something, and if so, let me know in the comments. See you in the next video.